Straighten up.
I think. Good, how are you?
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the Board of Trustees, the meeting to order on Tuesday, September 19th, 2017, at approximately 6:05 p.m. Would you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Order? Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Lino,
Here.
Duffy,
Here?
Baker,
Here.
Bell,
Here.
Enquist. Here. Bertle and Kadunko are excused.
Approval of the agenda.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approval of the minutes as published.
I will make that motion.
There's two sets. There's two sets, right? Both sets are individual.
There's a special meeting.
First set I will approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any changes, additions, deletions, grammatical remarks, other errors or omissions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, next set of minutes is for the special board meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the special board meeting.
Second. Same thing, ditto, comments, remarks,
I'm good.
changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Comments and correspondence. Comments. Does anybody in the audience care to make a comment about a non-agenda item? Now's your chance. Thank you. Correspondence. I want to highlight our correspondence.
Yes, sir. So a number of items of correspondence in the packet, the first of which begins on page 11. The first one is Ms. Cheryl Knaps. She writes to express her enjoyment of the trolley the past several weekends. She'd been up here. She's got a 3-year-old grandson that seemed to enjoy it as well, and he liked riding the blue trolley. We received another one that is in the form of a PowerPoint beginning on page 12. And I'm drawing a complete blank right now, or more. Susan O'More sent us this. She put it together. I think she did an absolutely fantastic job of reiterating some of the history of the village, and really just wanted to say, hey, thank you for everything that has taken place up here, and provide some of that historical information on how many of the structures and places came to be that we all know and love. Going over to page 23, there is an email from Mr. Patrick McKinley of Avon, Illinois. He talks about a situation that potentially was going to cause an injury where they were walking at the Sister Bay Marina. There was a drone. Wasn't exactly sure about what was going on with the drone, but certainly writes us to express his concern over drones, flying in and around highly populated areas. The FAA does regulate those in terms of where they can fly and how they can fly. It's not necessarily a village-regulated item unless we wanted to get into takeoff and landing areas, but again, that's regulated by the FAA. We have another item on page 24. This is from, I'm going to have a hard time with the last name, but it's James Valsney, and the subject was trolley, great idea. He states, wrote it for the first time today, appears to be the last time this year, had a great time, lived in Sister Bay part-time, and enjoyed the convenience of getting around offered by trolley. Hope to see it again next year. They actually requested that we run it up north to the area of the Tannenbaum Shops, Door County Ice Cream Factory, and maybe Sequest Orchards, which I thought was interesting, because we actually got requests from those businesses to run it up there. We just couldn't make it work in the route. And that is all for written correspondence, sir.
Anybody on the board have any correspondence they would like to add? Item number 1, presentation of 2017 advanced refunding bond results from Bayreuth.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Tasha to really take this and run with it. It's been her baby. I think she's doing a terrific job, and she deserves a pat on the back. She had some help from some wonderful gentlemen from Baird, Mr. Justin Fisher and Brian Ruschel, who helped her do the heavy lifting. So with that, I'll turn it up to all you guys.
Okay. Tonight we have with us Justin and Brian from Baird. We were able to refinance the 2011 series bonds. It was an advanced refunding. Overall, we saved about $520,000 in interest for the village over the life of the loan. This is pretty front-loaded for savings. It gets us over our major debt hurdles, so it's been a good strategic move for us, and I'll turn it over to the guys to give you a little more information.
Covered it.
You can leave now.
I'll take care of it.
I believe you have the presentation that we handed out, so I'll just go over on page 2, gives you a detailed listing of the issue summary and the refunded issue that Tasha just mentioned. We did conduct the sale. We were here in, I think, last April when we initially talked about this. And we actually conducted the sale of the refunding in July, on July 28th. So this is the results from that sale that you're seeing on page 2. As Tasha mentioned, this was a refinancing of general obligation bonds under a new issue. The new issue is on the top part there, the $9,620,000. It will be dated, and the settlement date on that will be taken care of was taken care of on August 23rd of this year. The new maturities on the new issue are starting April 1st of 2022 to 2031, as Tasha mentioned. That structure, and Justin will go into that much more detail on page 3 of the presentation. First interest payment will be October 1st of this year. There is a call provision that's put into place for the investors, and that was on April 1 of 2027 when the maturities from that point forward could be called. The Moody's rating that was received is A1, and the detail of that is in the back, and we're just going to go over that for you. There was an insurance guarantee from insured municipal AA, and that achieved then the interest rate that's shown there of 2.53%. When we talked about, I think back in last April, we talked about it around the 2.74. So that obviously is at the bottom part. You'll see the total savings that are listed there after issuance costs of $570,000. That's about $175,000 more than what we were anticipating back in April because of the excellent interest rate that is received. What was refunded, as Chasa mentioned, were the 2011 issues, which you can see at the bottom part. The maturities that were refunded were the 2022 to 31, so no extension of debt, just replacing those maturities with the new issues at the much lower interest rate, which is achieving these savings that you're seeing there at the bottom of the page, in the $500,000 range. And the savings and percentage refunded at just 5.99%. So then on page 3, I'll let Justin go through the detail behind the issue.
And so when we started this whole process, like Tasha said, this was a strategic move to really alleviate some of those pressures over the next few years. So when we first started this whole process, we were looking at, just over $100,000 in savings on an annual basis over the next 4 years. We ended up at, as you can see, $133,000 in annual savings over the next 4 years. So that's a very good amount of savings that you're going to feel right away in the next few years. And like Brian said, we're not extending any of the debt, we're not doing any of that. We're basically replacing the old debt with the new debt. So it's going to be that front-loaded savings, and then eventually you get to paying off the principal starting in 2022. So the last page is really is the Moody's rating report. This will give you kind of the explanation on why the village received an A1 rating. And an A1 rating, in the grand scheme of things, is an excellent rating. Investors look to the bond rating that villages, communities receive as kind of a guidance point to say, what do we want to pay to buy those bonds? What kind of interest rate should we expect? And so that's ultimately a guidance factor, and then the other part is going out to find those investors to sell the story on why they should buy village assisted day bonds. And so we did that for about a 2-week process. Going out to potential buyers, we get banks, trust companies, insurance companies, and so forth, all over the United States that ultimately ended up buying the Village's Sister Bank bonds. So it's a very dynamic process, and it ended up being a great result for the village.
Okay. Question? Well, thank you, first of all. It seems, a lot of work. It looks like a great result. I'm kind of curious, you mentioned there's no additional debt. When I look at, it says before refinancing on the left part of that page. It looks like in the boxes you've got highlighted, $8.875 million is what's being reallocated, and all of a sudden it becomes $9,620,000 for a difference of $935,000.
Yeah, and so that is attributed to essentially what the escrow, because you're not refinancing the bonds today, you're refinancing them into the future, and you have to pay for essentially the escrow until that call date. So you have to dump in a certain amount of money to buy those securities until the call date, and that's about what that amount ended up being. You're not earning as much in the escrow as what maybe you weren't paying on these bonds, because treasuries are just not earning as much. But ultimately, the net effect of everything, once you take that additional $935,000 in play, it still gets you to this net amount of $133,000 in annual savings over the next few years. So that, it encompasses everything.
That's good, and I understand that. It struck me that that's a lot of money to hold, I guess, the cost of the escrow. Or is that fees to do this too, or?
That included everything. This includes everything.
Okay.
But yeah, the escrow is obviously the high majority of what that is.
Okay. Did we get any kind of breakout just to understand what those fees are?
I can break down the fees for you if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
She has that.
Okay.
But the savings that is mentioned there is net of the fees.
Yep, I understand.
And then the comment where we said we didn't extend any debt, we didn't go beyond the year of what would be refinanced. So we kind of-
So we didn't extend the term, but we increased the amount being financed. Right,
Exactly.
The principal amount.
right,
Principal.
Right.
right, right. We added $935,000 worth of cost to do this.
You added $935,000 in principal. The overall cost of the debt service is reduced.
Right.
Maybe you should explain purchasing treasuries and having to use the interest off of the treasuries to offset.
Sure. Yeah, so what you essentially have to do is you have to buy these treasuries that are going to be put into escrow to make sure that the bondholders of that callable debt are going to be paid
Okay.
when the maturities occur, whether it be the April 1 or October 1 payments that are listed here. So essentially, you're purchasing these securities to lock in ultimately the maturity amounts, so those investors that are going to be, that have those callable maturities are going to get paid until the call date of 2021. So when you're buying those securities, you're not getting dollar for dollar amounts. You're paying for a certain amount. You're earning something, but ultimately you're putting in that additional money to buy those securities. That all plays into the analysis of, does it make sense to add the $900,000? And in this case, it does, because ultimately the net effect is over $500,000 savings to the village. So if that didn't make sense, if it was $900,000 included and you're only getting $50,000, well, that doesn't make sense.
Sure.
But right now, when we showed it to you, that net effect is so large, it made sense to move forward and let's lock in these low interest rates that we're seeing today.
Yep. Yeah, no, the only, and I'm not very familiar with this, so I'm more just asking questions is to understand if this is similar to refinancing a home, is that always the same?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
When we started down this process and they started explaining to me advanced refunding and what that was for this particular bond issue, the part that sort of threw me for a loop was this: you need to purchase treasuries. It's not like you go out and say, like with a home mortgage refinancing, you go to a bank and you're basically swapping out one debt for another. There's this intermediary process that, for whatever reason, the IRS has plugged it in as a requirement in order to continue the tax exempt status on the municipal bond.
Well, and the other reason is this debt is not callable until 2021, whereas a home you can refinance anytime. So that
Yep.
debt is essentially callable anytime.
Okay. All right.
Good
Does
question.
that answer your?
Yeah.
Does.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any comments? I'd like to thank you, I'd like to thank Tasha for bringing this to us originally. I mean, $500,000 in savings in 5 years is terrific.
Very good.
Great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Item number 2, review survey results from the 2017 citizen survey, discussion of results, considering appropriate motion for action.
So I'm going to go over this sort of quickly. If you have any questions, you certainly can ask them, but.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, sir.
When Zeke and I were talking about this, there's obviously a lot of data that went into this. If you have real detailed questions about something, I'd suggest we sit down with Zeke and get the data specific to those questions.
Yep.
When you start looking into it, it may shift what it says on the page, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so good point, in terms of, in particular, data bias one way or the other when you're taking a look at survey responses. So just again, a couple of quick notes on this. We had a pretty big increase in the number of respondents from 2015 to 2017, so I think that's a real net positive for the community and our engagement with members of the community. So we went from 82 to 195 respondents to the survey. For the most part, things stayed pretty static. I was looking for statistical changes of N greater than 5%. So you consider something statistically significant when you get a change more than 5%. There's only a couple of those to call out. So people, for whatever reason, looked at garbage collection a little less favorably than they did 2 years ago. On the flip side, property values and the economy, in particular the economy, they're seeing is much more favorable than they did a couple of years ago. Economic development is one that looks like people had a little bit of a changing opinion on that. People feel like it's a great place to live. They feel like it's a very safe place. That was one that I highlighted there, even though it wasn't statistically significant. I think it's important to just have that in the backs of your minds, particularly when you read the comments. Many of the comments say things like, it'd be great to have a police officer presence, but then when you look at the statistical data piece of it, it looks like everybody feels like it's a safe place. You have to ask the question, why do you need a police officer if you feel like it's a safe place? In terms of needs, question number 7, it looks like all the money that we've put into redoing roadways has really paid off. People have deprioritized this item from a 76% response in terms of most important or least important down to 51%. And in that 2-year time period, we've done Scandia, Woodcrest, Maple, and Bayshore Drive. So quite a bit of roadway has been resurfaced in that time period. I found it pretty interesting in terms of marina fuel system. There was a pretty big jump in how people perceived that particular item. And keep in mind, this is across 195 survey responses. So, I would say that there were probably a number of people that are either boaters or marina familiar, and they filled out the response. What's sort of interesting about that is that I don't feel like these were one issue responses. Sometimes you'll get that in a survey. So even though they may have responded because the marina was a question asked here, that would be one of the data points that I would infer from this. They also, I think, did a pretty good job of analyzing data across the entire community. Otherwise, you would see other data points skewed out one way or the other, and you don't see that. So these people were pretty familiar with the village and how it operates. The dog park also rose up on people's priority list over that 2-year time period as an item that should be called out. Included in your packet, the comments, you can feel free to read those. Some common themes that I would call out in particular with the trolley, just like the letters that you saw this evening. There were a number of very favorable comments about that. On the concern side, I would call out noise and control of noise and traffic volumes, in the community. Just people are aware of those or concerned about those things. So that's all that I really have. Not a lot of good data there.
Did you mention at the bottom of that
Oh,
particular page?
yes, sir. So one particular data point that we discussed in asking the questions, this is on the last page of the responses, and for whatever reason, the page number didn't print on this for me. But we asked a question about the premier area resort tax and if that would be something that the citizens would support. And so effectively 4-1, people supported the implementation of a premier area resort tax. So 156 responses, yes, 31 no. And I thought that was a very telling thing. When we sent it out, my gut was telling me that it would probably be something like, I don't know, 50-50 or 60-40. But what the survey really indicates is that you get a pretty overwhelmingly positive response by your citizens. And so they typically, when you see this, are educated about what that would mean in terms of being able to spread the cost burden out to visitors and not necessarily placing the cost burden on property owners, because these surveys only went to property owners. Again, I found that ought to be very favorable.
So I'm curious, did we mail these?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was the time frame?
What do you mean? And how long do they have to complete them? Or?
When did you
No,
mail them out?
right, when did you mail them out?
Oh, goodness, I'd have to go back and look at the mailing
Okay.
stamps. It's been a month and a half.
August.
Yeah, a month and a half, 2 months
August.
ago. Yeah.
Because we didn't get one.
Okay.
We, all of a sudden I see the survey results, I'm like, I never got the survey.
So certainly things get lost in the mail, so we apologize, but
Not in Sister
ultimately, actually, I got someone's prescription medications the other day for Bailey's Harbor. I'm like, oh, these came to me in Sister Bay. That's terrific.
Okay.
Would you like a copy? We can add your remarks.
No, it was interesting to see it in here, I'm like,
I guess one other
I was thinking
comment.
maybe it was May or June and I wasn't around or something, and, you know.
End of July, beginning of August.
Okay.
Some of the comments related to economic development, there were a number of comments about either supporting the pig or getting a second grocery store in. So I think that in particular, our part-time residents down in Illinois, where Illinois local governments have much greater authority over those sorts of things. Citizens may have responded that way, being property owners, but not necessarily Wisconsin familiar or being voters in terms of how we control economic development. Down in Illinois, they can basically pull a grocery store and plunk them down and put them in business. Here we don't operate that way. So that's all in all, I'm very pleased with the results, overwhelmingly positive comments. Of course, there were a couple negative ones in there, and I would expect that with any survey result of this size, and a great return rate as well, and should definitely be referred back to as we're making decisions through the budgeting process and policymaking process.
Any questions?
Very good.
Item number 3, consider a motion to reapprove of swamp pump replacement due to lower bid. Consider an appropriate motion for action.
So this item is one that Mike Skell brought back to my attention based on some action of the utility committee. We had originally thought that there were going to be an increased bid of costs or proposal of cost in doing this project later on. He got the bid back. It looks like it's going to save us around $4,000 by the time it's all said and done to go ahead and pull the trigger now. Mike's recommending that we go ahead and do it now. Normally, we would run this through the committee process. I reached out to Committee Chairman Baker with the Utilities Committee and said, Scott, would be okay with you if we bypassed Utilities Committee, took this straight onto the board, given that it already had prior working by the Utility Committee and authorization from the board. This is really a revisit item. Scott said, yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, put it on, so we put it on, and we're looking for some quick action from you all tonight to move ahead with it. The money we're proposing to take out of the street maintenance line item, of which we have some funding available based on light snow this last year.
Street or storm sewer?
Street maintenance. So there's $22,240 remaining in the storm sewer item. So we'll take all of that and then take the net difference, which is about, let's call it $2,500 there, would come out of the street maintenance line item.
And we'll get it done this year.
Mike, do you know when they'll start?
As soon as we tell them to order.
Okay.
So I think there's 12 weeks for the pump, but I didn't order it yet, based on what would happen here next.
Okay. I'll make a motion, we approve the recommendation.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? None? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Item number 4, discussion on storage of records and a possible upgrade to the old blower building. Consider an appropriate motion for action.
Okay, so in page 43 in your packets, I included a board report and then a quote, which is now not current. I've got an updated one for that. So the situation in short order is that we have been borrowing for village and utilities and marina and ice rink, all of our record-keeping purposes, well house number one's building. And it just so happens that we had some extra space in there when they built that facility that we could have access to climate control, store our records in there for long-term storage, and then go get access to them off of some industrial shelves that we have in there. So they're not super accessible, given the volume that we've accumulated over the years, but they're accessible enough that we can shuffle things around and get access to them. With the coming installation of a generator at well number one and the other upgrades that are taking place in that facility, we no longer are going to have the ability to utilize that space for record keeping. Staff really kicked this around a number of different directions to throw out ideas. Mike Skell offered up the idea, hey, why don't we use the old blower building, which is up on the Autumn Court. It used to be what housed the air pumps for the aeration of the old ponds for the old wastewater plant. So it's just a center block building sitting up there. Doesn't currently have electricity in it, so Mike went out and got some quotes for us for that particular item. The updated quote is $65.25 because they're required exit lights per the building code. So we had not included those in the previous quote. After talking to Brett, turns out we need to put those in. We certainly could use that building unpowered. There are some implications for your records longer term if you don't have some sort of very mild climate control or humidity control. We've had some other conversations. Steve Mann sort of has a plan that he offered up to say, look, we could throw some pallets down, palletize these things, shrink wrap them in plastic, haul them over to the Parks building and warehouse them there, or we can haul them over to the Parks building and put them on shelves. But the ultimate question that I'm really posing to you all tonight is we'll find a safe, dry place to store those. They won't necessarily be accessible if we put them in the Parks building. Or you could elect to have them stored at Blower building. We can move the shelves over, set things up there. The question becomes, do you want them to be climate controlled or quasi-climate controlled? If so, there's a dollar amount attached to that we want to use them to do that. Staff doesn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Your records to put where you'd like.
I'm just wondering, do we digitize things in an effort to streamline what's physically, I mean, there's probably things we should have physically, but there are probably other things that
Yep.
if you have them electronically, you don't really need space and.
So one of the things we talked about was if we just palletized them and shrunk wrap them, we could go over and get, a couple boxes at a time and scan things in and sort them digitally and put them on the server. Our server's on its last legs, so whatever we do, we need to do it as a right now to facilitate that construction work. Hence the put them on pallets, shrink wrap them, and figure out what to do with them at a later date.
What types of records are they? You say in the report that they're typically records we need to keep for 7 years or less?
Yes, sir. So we have personnel records that go back historically, and we're required to keep those for an indefinite time period. So some of these go on for back to the 1900s, 1912.
Let me ask my question differently.
Okay.
If this is 100% of the records, how much is gone in 7 years or less?
Janelle, do you want to answer that one? I know we did a big purge.
Well, you get rid of this much, then you put in this much. So you're always having
Right, so
problems. It's a continual ongoing thing,
It's a shuffle.
yeah. We go over every spring basically, and we'll purge as much as we can prior to the spring shredding date.
So take, for example, your meeting folders in hard form. We began digitizing those basically 4 years ago, but we still maintain a hard paper copy for legal reasons. Probably not a bad idea for us to have a paper copy, a single paper copy of all that material in case we're ever brought into a court situation, largely because some of them are in a format that we don't have the ability to digitize.
So how much, I'll get to my answer yet, I know. So we have the records that we need to roll every year, purge, put in, purge, put in. But I get the impression there's other longer-term records that you need to keep ad infinitum, or the historical records you need to keep for whatever reason?
There are some, yeah.
Okay, so should those be stored separately and differently from the 7-year ones?
We've discussed that
We
and
have
bringing,
discussed that.
I think we've got, I don't know, like 5 to 10 cases of long-term records. Most of them we already keep at the ad building. So for example, the village's minute books, those are already in a climate control sitting in the old safe up at the ad building. But right now, there's we use it as a supply closet in my office. If you come back in the office, there's a door to the left. I'm just sticking those cases back in there and using that space.
I always thought that was your secret exit.
It is. So, escape tunnel down there.
The one thing with Steve's second plan that he came up with at the Parks Building, the records would be, they'd be out in the open, so we would have to move the confidential things up by us. But there you would have heat, you'd have electricity,
Yep.
and you'd have climate control, because there's a dehumidifier there.
And do you have space for that?
Yes, you would rearrange things.
A piece of equipment would come out of that building, go over to the warehouse. They maintain it in this building for convenience. But he said, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, we could rearrange this and make this work.
So then if you put the rolling 7-year or less in the lower building and took the small amount of records that you need to be climate controlled, okay, do you need to spend any money on the lower building?
We debated that a good bit, and I think my opinion on that is no. We could just use it as a cold warehouse facility. The only thing that would, in addition to the 7-year records need to be separated out, would be electronic records. We'd want them to go, down below freezing and then up to whatever the temperature would be, and also be exposed to humidity. But there are some of those on tape that we can purge out.
The only thing I was told when I was checking on pricing for storage units when we were discussing all the alternatives, is that if you get a real humid summer, if they're old records and it's old paper, it may stick together and then basically be destroyed.
But at the end of 7 years, you're tossing a lot of it anyway.
Yeah.
So my question to Janelle was, how long would a piece of paper last, even if we stuck it outside in the sun and the rain and the wind and the cold and the snow? Would it still be readable 3 years from now, even if we didn't put a building on it? And we thought, yeah, there's like trash that you see along the road that makes it that long, so 7 years isn't that much longer.
I'm glad we're being scientific.
Try to extrapolate. I think we'd be okay without electricity. It will impair our ability to do searches of those records. That may lengthen the time with which we would have to do a records request. So when someone, for example, if someone initiated litigation against us, one of the things that we do is charge them for the actual time in procuring those records. The courts demand that that be a reasonable amount of time, which means we have to have the records in some reasonable amount of order. So if it takes us 20% longer to get those out because of where they're stored, it's probably not unreasonable. If on the other hand we have to pull apart, shrink wrap pallets and really roll through things, that's probably unreasonable in the court's opinion.
Okay.
How long is this proposal going to be good for? I mean, how long we're going to spend? I see that we still have to pay WPS as part of this, so I'm thinking it's $7,000, $8,000 total.
No. $100.
Just $100 to connect. Okay.
Because the transformer is 8 feet from the building.
Okay. So how long is this going to? Would this be viable for us? Is this indefinitely or?
No, subject to change after 90 days. So
No, I'm saying we're putting this building, we're putting money into this building. Is this our storage for 50 years or is this a storage for 2 years?
probably somewhere in the middle of that. If you put money into it, you can continue to use it. If you don't put money into it, you can continue to use it. It's just a question of usability.
When you say we keep a paper record to feel good about it, it's something that, is that a legal requirement?
No,
or is that?
That is not why we keep the paper record. We keep the paper record simply because of formatting. So for example, a plan commission packet where we would have a 24 by 36 formatted plan set, and in many of our property records, those are common. Sometimes we're given material samples that also get incorporated into the file. So when someone brings in one of those vinyl swatches or a paint pad, we'll sometimes add those to the property file to keep them for perpetuity in case something does come up. So for example, on Al Johnson's, that became a thing that we need to go back and look at.
We're required to keep those material samples that come into plan commission. Anything that comes in is
Technically,
gotta be
it's
retained.
part of the public record. You know, all of those materials that are submitted, we can choose to discard those or purge. And we do that pretty routinely. So when a project is completed, we've issued the zoning permit, those things go on their way. So to distill it down, it's mostly the large format things we have a challenge with. If it's
was that 11.5 by 17 is the largest that we can scan in.
What is it that we have to retain a paper copy of?
Your meeting minutes by state statute, copies of your agenda by state statute, and then personnel records by federal law.
And how much of that is,
Oh, and your financial records for 3.
they cannot be,
Financial records have to be
Digital.
in for 5.
Okay.
but those have to be paper copies, they cannot be digital.
I'm unsure on that particular question.
I think that whatever we can do to move this to digital is in our best interest, that there's not a lot you have to keep paper copies of anymore, and paper only costs you money on everything. I guess what I'd really hate to see is to spend money on this and then have it be a short term or even a medium term. It would seem to
Over the next
not be
couple of
that.
years, if you work toward digitizing more.
Yeah, then you're racing against the
So,
possible damage from the
And
non-climate control.
That's always been the goal. From the time that I went through, this is an exaggeration, but 80 million boxes. The goal was to get it down to, to digitize it. I've been here 12 years and that hasn't happened.
I think it's a part of
We
our
have good
IT.
intentions,
But-
but
There's also companies that'll do this, and I'm guessing it's not that far off from the cost of,
Well, not only that, so the Historical Society 2 years ago got a intern and did just that. Took the records, made sense of them, organized,
That'd be
purged
nice.
some, digitized others, and got them into the computer form. That could be something we could look at with UWGB or somewhere, is get an
Sure.
intern next summer, even if you gotta pay them
Yep.
a little bit. Get a system, get them in there.
I would almost think it's worth getting a professional, because then they put the metadata in there and then you can search them, because you can get an intern to scan them in, but to get all that metadata in there, you can get, it's a huge amount of work one time, but there's companies that specialize, and I would wonder if that's worth it. I personally don't think we should spend the money on upgrading this facility.
Yeah, I don't think we all were really strongly attached to it, but the reason it's up here as a board discussion as opposed to us just moving them into a particular place is, again, they're your records, you're legally bound to. So if we make a decision to not have climate control and the records degrade, then you all need to feel good about, it wasn't that big of a deal. We deliberated the cost of storing them and the climate control and all those other things and move ahead with it.
I think as part of it, we should make sure we get it digitized, and if we've been trying to do it for 12 years, let's make sure that that doesn't happen a year from now even.
Right.
This is something that could be get done.
And the sensitive stuff go over to the long-term stuff go over to the climate-controlled dehumidifier.
Right, so in the meantime, if you need the space, because you gotta move it because of the reconstruction, put it over in the blower building. Plan B, start looking at how you're going to digitize it. If it sits over there for a year before they get started, it sits there for a year.
Okay.
And just remind us of this quote when it comes time, and come back and say this is what it's gonna take to digitize.
Right.
Okay. Someone will, motion and
Okay.
second.
do you want a motion and a second?
Sure, we'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Okay, so your motion is that for the time being, the village's records which are now in storage at the blower building, or the well house shall be transferred to the blower building. And a concerted effort shall be made to work on seeing that those records are digitized. All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Item number 5, a review of 2017 strategic planning worksheet and results, consider appropriate motion for action.
Hole puncher ran a hole through all of my page numbers. I can see that it starts on page 45, but I have no idea what page we're on after that.
So how about if I start then,
Yes, sir.
since you don't know what the page numbers are?
There you go.
The strategic plan is really the CIP plan.
Yeah.
You recall last year we put in place our first 5-year CIP plan. So the purpose of this is to get us thinking as we start to go through the budget process. Finance committee is meeting twice in the next week, and one of the primary issues is to work through the CIP or strategic plan. If there's something in this plan that you would like to see updated or added to or subtracted from, you'll have that opportunity to tell the finance committee and the board what that is. at some point in time. So the idea was not to go through this page by page
Okay.
and look at all this, because you're gonna have a couple of committees working on this in the background. But to familiarize yourself, refamiliarize yourself with it, to see if there's anything you want to add. But this is a 5-year rolling program, so things would have come off last year, we'll add things this year and add another year to it. I would remind you that we've done a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, and so now it's kind of the time to go, okay, and let it settle a little bit, and then kind of start to re-evaluate where we go with the CIP plan over the next couple of years.
Okay.
Nate?
What exactly happened with my snowmaking machine? Or the snowmaking machine that was allocated last year? And how does that process go, and can we consider that again this year?
Do you remember what winter was like last year?
We needed more snow. My point exactly, Dave.
It has to be cold enough to make snow, Dave.
Nate, the money got funded, I don't recall which account in particular, but I do recall it getting approved to move ahead. When we came up with a miscalculation on one of the bond payments, and also did not receive the grant funding from DNR that we had anticipated receiving, we put all CIP spending on hold, so we just literally froze. There's some irony in the word everything. It was something that we could look at as part of the 2018 cycle if we wanted to go ahead and make that procurement. I believe it was going to come out of miscellaneous projects. I'd have to go back and look at the minutes.
Okay, I was just curious, and I'd like to see it on the list for consideration.
Yeah, it was approved last year.
Yeah, I
so-
remember
Yeah.
going through.
It doesn't, I mean, it's not like it's still approved because it was approved, or?
It would have been approved for this year.
Okay.
Winter's over, so now we go through the new cycle, we'll look at it in finance.
We didn't procure the trucks or the gator or anything else that also was approved. We just put everything on hold.
Okay, I feel better now.
Yeah, it's not just the snow.
I thought it was just me.
I can give you a little more info on that now that I've gotten my spreadsheet open here.
All right.
The snow machine was put into the sledding hill line item, and then shortly after January 1, we got a final bill on the remainder of the work on the sledding hill, and no longer had the funds in that line item for the snow machine, so.
Okay.
So we kind of used it for the sledding hill.
Yeah.
Just get any
It
snow.
sort of went there.
There you go. So out of curiosity, do you know what was the final bill or total on the sledding hill?
I could
If
look
it's
that
right
up for you,
there.
yeah.
Oh, well, it's not right there, I was just curious.
No, I don't have it readily available, but
How much did we allocate for the snow machine?
10,000. And that was to,
It was a generator and a pump. You had to have
generator, a pump, and
pressure
provide a
washer.
little more, to fill, to provide some funding for the remainder of the work on the sledding hill, just wasn't quite enough,
Okay.
so.
Anybody else on
Okay.
the CIP? Otherwise, you'll be seeing it again several times.
We will be.
Consider a motion to approve resolution 363-09-1917 opposing the Aquila Resources, Inc. Fort Back 49 project. If you'll recall, we had discussion on this at the board a couple of months ago. Last month, the county board approved opposition to it, and we said we would bring it back to here. If you'd like to do this and go on record as opposing it, as a village board, that's fine. If you feel at the county level that what they did is sufficient, then that's fine too.
I tried to provide some additional background information from what we had. In doing some research, there are some incredible pros on the economic side of things, and there's also some pretty concerning cons on the environmental side of things. So presented really without commentary because staff doesn't have sufficient wisdom to tell you if this is a good idea or not, given the level of research we did.
Well, it makes me nervous.
Well, in those pictures, and if you know
Yeah.
out west, okay, one was Colorado, and they shut down the Snake River, and there's all kinds of commercial vendors, fishermen, kayakers, all that. Not only are they out of business, all the people that supply them materials, all the hotels and all the restaurants, they had to go and cancel the remainder of the season, all their bookings. So there may be economic positives, but there also could be significant economic Negatives.
So from the gist of the conversation, I believe somebody would probably make a motion.
I will make that motion
And I
to
will
oppose.
second it. Gladly second it.
Any discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
So basically, you're adopting resolution number 363, which opposes
Correct.
the Aquila Resources
Yeah.
proposed back 49 project.
Yes.
Okay.
Item number 7, discussion and recommendation of the Plan Commission to approve a certified survey map for parcels listed, commonly referred to as the Mueller property on Maple Drive, and the second parcel, unaddressed parcel commonly referred to as the O'Malley property. Consider a motion to adopt the resolution 360-091917, approving the CSM for the aforementioned properties. I do have the official CSM up here.
So, quick background, this is a simple property swap between owners. I think some of the folks associated with this project in the back, I see Brian back there, Brian's a surveyor, to come up with a CSM. This is on page 67 in your packets. Pretty straightforward thing. Plan Commission reviewed it and recommended its adoption. Somebody's gonna get a bigger backyard and another person's gonna get a bigger front yard. Shortly, or in simple, Brian's nodding his head.
Good job. And there was a public hearing.
Yes, sir, until we conduct a public hearing at that time.
Yep, went through planning.
So moved.
Second?
Other discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Item number 8, discussion on village bylaws and confirmation of President Lino's appointments. I have one thing to bring up in the village bylaws. I spoke to Patrick last month. The Marina Committee, as the Marina Committee Chair, he would like to see us put back in place on the Marina Committee with 2 alternate positions that we removed earlier in the year.
Or at least one.
Okay. And I did speak with Corey. I said I would speak to Corey. He was
Okay.
willing to do. So if we approve adding back the alternate position for the Marina Committee, then I would put forward the nomination of Corey Diltz to fill that particular position. So I would need a motion, number 1, to add back via the bylaws the alternate position, and then a second motion accepting and approving the nomination of Corey Diltz.
I'll make the motion to add back the alternative position for the Marina Committee.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Make the motion to approve Corey Diltz as the alternate for the Marina Committee.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Item number 9, reporting county activities of County Supervisor Dave Lino. We did have the county board meeting today. It was a very light meeting, it actually took about 30 minutes to do the meeting. We have a statewide county supervisor meeting, Wisconsin County Association conferences in the Wisconsin Dells coming up this weekend. It's a 3-day meeting where they go over with all the counties, everything's happened with all the budgets that just got passed. And there'll be a lot of discussion with state representatives and with administrative representatives at the state level at that meeting. It's also, they have several concurrent workshops that you can go to learn about transportation funding or human services or any number of items. There's about 20 different concurrent workshops that will be attending to try and get information. So that's why the county board meeting is kind of light this time, because everybody's getting ready to go to this meeting. We also toured the new EMS center / community center in Sturgeon Bay. It's coming along very nicely. It's a really impressive building that they were able to save that county workshop, highway shop, and inside now they've saved all the stone where they had to cut windows out or put windows in or doors. They saved stone and were able to re-put it back in. All the superstructure, the wooden superstructure up above was all soda washed and sprayed, blasted, and
Wow.
it's impressive inside. They've been doing a great job. It remains on track. It's supposed to pretty much be completed in December of this year. They'll start to move ADRC people and senior center people into there probably in December, early January. There will be probably a soft dedication in January. The EMS building should be done about the same time, and ultimately in early spring there'll be a community-wide opening of it or grand opening of it. But they remain on track. It's impressive the work that they're doing. They're doing a great job.
Good.
So, that's what I got, unless there's other questions about it. Item 10, review the financial statements, consideration of a motion to approve the monthly bills. It's on page 68. I'll make the motion, we approve the bills in the amount of $286,971.24.
Second.
Discussion. On bills.
Nope, no questions.
No questions?
Wow.
Oh,
Okay, hurry up, quick. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Well, I guess I did have one, but that's
What-
okay.
what was it?
No, well, no, just the interim marina management course. And we're sending Amy to that, I understand, is that?
Supposed to be, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
Report by the village administrator on village activities and projects.
Janelle?
Page 77?
What happened to my thing?
The hole got punched through it.
We didn't want you to
Okay,
talk.
so there should be a couple of reports, one from myself, one from Mr. Skill, one from
Amy?
Mr. Mann, and one from Ms. LaRolla.
Right after 15.
Got it, okay. So just a quick rundown on some items as listed there. For Harbor View, they have, since I wrote this, hauled in manholes and concrete pipe, which I would anticipate be going into the ground sometime when Harbor Construction gets around to it. That really is the holdup, as I understand it, is just sequencing the project. Stony Ridge, construction on a second apartment building is underway out there. Restoration has progressed on. We'll discuss this more in closed session as an item. Marketplace is another item that we'll discuss in closed session this evening. The quarry have had some more recent conversation with Pre-3 on their project. They do have a site plan produced. There is some conflict with the village's official map and what they want to do, and we're working with our engineers to try to come up with a solution for that. Mill Road West site for Goki continues to make progress. Siding's up, rock is on the building, and they're moving towards completion with that particular property. And then, yes, sir.
When's the anticipated completion of that?
He's not giving one, sir. You know, I hear pretty frequently that they'll have a contractor on site, you know, and the comment I got from a citizen was 2 employees and 1 hammer, and they're working on it, so it's sort of slow going. Ultimately, he's beholden to the 2 buyers that have committed to purchase the residential units, so I'm not sure what their timeline is, but I would imagine they'll drive that.
He
Yes,
does
ma'am.
have, you know, he's posted the for sale signs in it.
Sure.
I mean, I know progress is being made, but if you have individuals that are buying the condo units, they're probably working on finishes and inside stuff. That's understandable,
Yeah.
okay.
So from our end, he's on the hook from a minimum assessed value payment. I think he's met the terms of our development agreement, which compelled him to put up, from memory, I think it was a building valued at $125,000. The idea was if he got it that far along, he'd complete it. Because at the time we wrote it, we were looking for that December deadline, which he missed and had to make a $12,000 payment to us. I would anticipate that we will end up doing another release on one of those units as he gets closer to completion that will go into an escrow account with Attorney Nesbitt towards our restrooms. I have had a conversation with him in the last 2 weeks about completing plans for the restroom. That is supposed to be in progress, along with his other project. And what is consuming most of our time right now is the 2018 budget process. So far, the budget has made its way through all of the operational committees and personnel. It's on to finance tomorrow for a meeting, and then we'll ultimately come back here for a couple of meetings before being adopted at public hearing. The other reports are in there. If you have any questions, we'll certainly be glad to try to
field those for you. Mike, any comments you want to make?
Yeah, this report actually has changed. And today, 4 of the wells were taken care of at about 3:15.
Great.
So we only now have 1 well that's inside the area and 1 well outside the area, and they're working on it. And the other 2 were, they gave us proof of abandonment. So,
I can give you an update on the water rate case. Mike could do this as well, but we have submitted to the PSC. We actually got the questions back earlier than we thought we would. So we expected them back in November. We've already received our first round of questions. I don't know how many rounds there will be. So again, it's my first time through the process, so I hope things are moving forward and hopefully we'll learn where we stand pretty soon.
Questions? Well, I got a question going back to the original one, the idea of the quarry with a site plan with, that doesn't fit the whatever. Is that site plan available?
We're going to have some conversation, closed session about it.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. We will move down to committee reports.
Okay.
Admin has not met. Admin and comp oversight not met. Communications technology has not met. Coastal bylaws,
Not met.
DCECD.
I wasn't at the last meeting, anticipation of a bigger meeting at the end of this month, that just got canceled, so.
Yep. So we had someone come from WEDA and talk to us about the new Foxconn project in southeast Wisconsin and all of the sort of economic value that that will create as a result of building somewhere between 14,000 and 50,000 jobs. We also welcomed aboard Ms. Paige Funkhauser, which you all recall previously working for the SBAA as the Economic Development Manager, which is the position previously held by Mr. Sam Perlman. We had a data point shared that I'll share back with you as we move forward with the budgeting process. Collectively, a number of municipalities, as Dave talked about in the previous meeting, are trying to get a housing market analysis done for Door County and the municipalities therein. We had a realtor present some information to us, and she called out Sister Bay specifically. In Sister Bay, at the time that this presentation was done, there were exactly 4 single-family homes up for sale in Sister Bay, and her commentary related to that were, you know, the real estate market is so tight up there that, you know, it's almost not worthwhile doing business in the community because there isn't enough inventory for us to even go up and show, you know, if you only have 4 homes in a community that size. So just some anecdotal things from that meeting.
Economic development. No met. Finance, is meeting this week. Fire.
Fire, 2 sets of minutes, one from August 16th. Country House now has a AED mounted on the wall that they won at the class that was there. Cheryl Zog Casey won it, and it went to the Country House. The minutes for September 12th, mainly budget, that first line, 2018 budget discussion action. I think he transposed those numbers. The village should be 2,300 and the town should be 4,500.
Oh, well, that's right on here, which I'll make a mention. I think this is awesome. Chris does a great job.
We got to hire him.
Yeah, I mean, look at that budget. You do have increases, but you have some offsetting decreases.
Yes.
He puts it on one page. He gives you last year, this year, what the change is going to be. Great explanation.
Should we hire him?
I think he does a fantastic job.
He
That's
does.
the kind of, I mean, you want to make a finance committee's work easy.
There it is.
That's how you do it.
And that's how all his reports are.
Yeah.
So we're looking at this port account are the testers for the masks, and everything has to go through a 2-year approval. And so this is starting. Rescue 12 is what they refer to as their toolbox. That makes it to every trip. That makes every trip. It's the jaws of life and everything. It's a 1987 vintage, and we've slid our equipment bed back there. So we'll be looking at a replacement of that. Or Chris also offered some ideas about just getting a new chassis, sending it in to do that. But if you look at the estimated numbers, early estimated numbers, it doesn't seem that far off from a new truck. So we'll be exploring that. We have an upcoming meeting on the 26th, I believe, where we're going to look specifically at that.
Because we'll have to plug that into our finance numbers.
Yeah, well, it's been a couple of years, but there was still some money in that reserve, no matter how much is in there.
Well,
That's the
and
question.
remember, we have
How
that
much?
brush truck too.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Our district exploratory has not met, I presume.
And it has not met.
Historical Society.
Were there anything in here? I didn't see any. We met on September 7th. Still working on the barn. I think they kind of took a step back. And suddenly there became a lot of disagreements between the older folk about what they wanted. So it's been pushed back. That's basically what all that happened. They will be participating at Fall Fest with soup again this year.
Holiday lighting has not met. Library.
The library meeting met on September 12th. Christina Johnson submitted a report. She's been doing a great amount of programs with really good attendance. Marina Fest was very successful for the book sale. The numbers are in your report. They did 2 days. They did Sunday, and that was really good. They're going to adjust that time a little bit. They started a little early on Sunday for people, so they're going to go forward with that for next year. Money was raised for the junior high students' trip to Washington, D.C. And the budget was submitted, and I thought that was also wonderful. There is going to be no increase to the village or to Liberty Grove again, so we're doing well with that.
Great.
And you got that?
I do have it, yes.
Marina Fest.
Well, we had a marina meeting. Minutes are in the packet here. Any questions?
Marina Fest, we're going to put together a letter or an ad in the Pulse for the thank you for the donations of, it ended up 18 something, I believe, 18,000.
Nice.
Very nice.
And overall, how did the Marina Fest and Marina committee feel that Marina Fest went?
Well, we have a meeting next month. We'll get into the nitty-gritty, but I think it went well considering the weather.
Yeah, there may want to be discussions about vendors for Sunday.
Yes.
That's one disappointment, I guess.
Yes.
I mean, weather, completely understandable, that happens. Sunday, there were a fair amount of people there, and a lot of people saying, where do I get a beer? Where do I get a hamburger? Where's the vendors? You know, so that was a little, I mean, they had a concert and, you know, but there wasn't anywhere to,
Just seems
for
as
people
though
to spend their money.
Some of the nonprofits are getting tired.
Yeah. Yeah, it is what it is, that's fine. You know, it's just time to call in the for-profit or
Yeah,
somebody.
We actually had one of the vendors pay me a call, the gentleman that does cheese curds, and he had a similar, complaint. There was a sort of a limited number of those folks operating Sunday, and it was the for-profits. Given that we have this idea of exclusivity over items that the nonprofits sell and items that the for-profits sell, the nonprofits also sell the beverages, and so they can buy cheese curds but couldn't necessarily get a soda or a beer or anything of a beverage viewpoint. which is a little bit awkward. So he, in his operation, also has the ability to do hamburgers, hot dogs, brats, soda, all those other things. He said, look, it's not a problem at all. You know, if you guys aren't going to do that on the second day, if the fire department doesn't want to do it and you guys want to fill in, I'd be more than glad to bring my stuff up and open it up and run it on the second day and offer those products, to give people that choice.
I heard the fireworks are awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, they were.
Parking.
We need a meet. We really need a meet.
Denise has, got a couple of dates. I gotta work with Janelle to call out to see if we can do that, but it's, the 3rd and 4th are the potential meeting dates.
Parks. Minutes probably aren't there.
Approve the budget, send it on. That was the big one.
We asked for,
The parks budget, I saw minutes, I didn't see anything about a budget. They're just right in
Page
the
is the
packet.
first one? Yeah, 125.
there was a budget presented in parks that we
Utilities.
said that we approved and forwarded on to finance
Okay.
for their review. So, we also talked a fair amount about the YMCA programming, and we're expecting them to come back in October. Is it October or November? With their
I
year-end.
don't, it'll be whenever they get their year-end
So with
stuff.
their year-end review, so we have an idea of what they programmed and what went on.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to make some decisions what we're looking to do for next year. But again, we won't do anything until we get that review, so we know where we're at.
So regarding next year in parks, so two things would, and I know I asked once, as maybe a broken record, but maybe if it gets done before next summer, then we don't have the issue of timing. Second ladder on the swim pier would be great. I've already seen a couple situations where kids are getting help on the second side because it would be,
They're treading too
because they're,
long.
right, and they're messing around on the first side, which, understandable, the kids love it, it's a great thing, but a second ladder, it's big, which is awesome, but it's a long way around to get. And then, I think there was discussion about roping the swim area, and I get this year, whatever, but
There
just
was-
that we
there was
plan
conversation
for
at the
next
committee
year.
level.
Continues to be discussion,
Okay,
trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
So and Steve's gonna come back with some ideas.
okay.
Anything else on park? Personnel.
The results of which will be included in the budget.
Plan commission.
You took action on that item
Yeah.
tonight, and we'll take action in the future on those items.
SBAA.
SBA board met on Thursday, September 7th. The new website is up. I don't know if anybody's had a look at it. I haven't, but it looks pretty good. I mean, from what we looked at. For Fall Fest, going forward with Fall Fest, they have opened up a market tent for any of the SBA business members to have a booth for $150. It says here in the minutes, any vendors. That doesn't mean any vendors, it's SBA vendors. And then one of the new events is going to be Touch a Truck, which is kind of for kids. It's for the big vehicles, for the kids to come and look at them, ask questions. I believe they've decided to put that, to keep it in the fire station. We had a discussion about moving it up to Country Walk, which would have been great, but they have to return the vehicles to the bay. And with the parking up there, we didn't know, if we'd have to hire somebody to manage the parking, that so I wouldn't get parked in, so I think they're gonna keep them down at the station. So that's gonna be a new event, and the other new event is the Big Wheel Rally, which is going to be a team race.
I was thinking the board should, a team.
We have 2 pushers and 1 rider, and Louise has purchased these big wheel machines, so, and that will be on Sunday.
And as I understand it, the drift model.
What about the soapbox derby thing they used to run down
We're
the
gonna do
hill?
this instead.
I think that's what that is.
Yeah, that's a neat idea.
And
There is going to be a board, there's going to be a The fall dinner is Thursday, October 26th. That's it.
Tourism Zone Commission.
Sister Bay has moved solidly into the third place position in Door County in room tax collection, so we've now surpassed Ephraim, and we are stone's throw away from Gibraltar. Don't know if we'll get Gibraltar earlier in the season. It looked like we were going to overtake Gibraltar. We may or may not by the time the season wraps up. Our tax collections are up, I believe it's 14.2% over everyone else. And now that we've gotten this last month of collection in, like, we're the only one that is double digit up. Everyone else is single digit up, like 1 to 3%. So it looks really good.
Nice.
Utilities.
Minutes are in the packet. Heavy meeting on budget, which has been forwarded.
Okay. Discussion regarding management place in the future agenda referred to a committee official or employee. I think other than what we discussed, that was going to happen with finance, the parks issues that Pat brought up. Is there anything else anybody have a reference for? All right, that being said, I'd like to make a motion to convene an executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.851E, deliberating and negotiating the purchasing of public properties, investing public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require closed session. Motion by Lino.
Second.
Roll call vote. Lino, yes.
Duffy, yes.
Val, yes.
And Chris, yes?
Baker, yes?
Okay, we are now in closed session. We'll take a 5-minute